In September, we went to Italy, the last race of the season, the 16th Grand-Prix of Europe and the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Since Silverstone, Fangio had won again at the Nürburgring, but Peter Collins still had an outside chance of winning the World Championship if he could win and Fangio score no points. BRM, who had put up such a showing at Silverstone, were absent, so British hopes lay entirely with Vanwall and the struggling Connaught team. Gordini were also struggling, the French team having cars for Robert Manzon and Da Silva Ramos. Connaught, without adequate funds, could no longer attract the top drivers and were relying on Les Leston, Jack Fairman and Archie Scott-Brown. Archie's missing hand could have been a problem with the Italian medical authorities, so Ron Flockhart was available as well. Car 48 was the private Maserati 250F, due to be driven by Bruce Halford. The Vanwalls were getting better and better every race, and with their Chapman-designed chassis and on this high-speed circuit their advantageous, super slippery, cost-in body shapes, much was expected. The drivers, Harry Schell, Maurice Trintignant, and the local veteran, Taruffi. Maserati had produced a new long-nose version of the 250 Villoresi. There were privately entered Maseratis for Salvadori, Halfords, Baron de Graffenried, Gerini, Godia, and Piotti. Connaught had abandoned fuel injection in favor of Webber's side draft induction. Since Brooks's famous victory in Syracuse nearly 12 months ago, success had eluded the little team from Send in Surrey, Jack Fairman's fourth at Silverstone being the best. This modest result had cost the team £20,000 and money was already running out. Amongst the paddock celebrities, we spotted Gigi Voleresi and Earl Howe, representing the RAC and here to persuade the organisation to allow Archie Scott-Brown to race. Monza has both a high-speed bank track and the conventional road circuit. The race this year was to be run on a combination of the two, so high-speed stability was going to be at a premium. Now much better organised, the Ferrari team, who had inherited the Jano-inspired design the previous winter when Lancia's own race programme had collapsed, were posting unbeatable times in practice. Fangio made pole, with Castellotti and Musso making it an all-Ferrari front row. Next best was Taruffi in the Vanwall, beating all the Maseratis. Jack Fairman was the fastest of the Connaught drivers, but back on the fifth row. The veteran Villoresi was just 0.3 of a second slower than Collins and made the third row. Archie Scott-Brown was not allowed to race, and so Flockhart was at the wheel of Connaught number 4. Moss, in the long-nose version of the 250F Maserati, could do no better than 6th fastest, despite this superbly controlled drift. Up on the steeply raked banking, drivers could do little more than point and hope. Fangio was in top form, and looked certain at this stage to win his 4th World Championship. Eugenio Castellotti was second to Fangio in the middle of the front row, and his best result to date had been second to Collinz in the French Grand-Prix. Moss's Maserati number 36 would have to overcome the Van Walls before attacking the Ferraris on the morrow. The Ferrari team returned to base as the Gordini mechanics were still hard at work. Finally, it was time for us to call it a day. Tomorrow would have the answers. Race day dawned surprisingly wet, but the heavy skies were breaking up and the prospects for the race looked better. The morning's Gran Turismo race would help to dry the track when the rain stopped. Connaught, prompt as ever, was the first to be warming up a car, Fairman's. The B-Type, with its Alta engine, had now been christened the Syracuse model, in recognition of young Tony Brooks's brilliant win last year. Numerically the strongest marque, Maserati are always willing to sell their 250F to private owners, and the straight-six engine is now estimated to be giving around 260 brake horsepower. Rodney Clark and Jack Fairman arrived to supervise the rollout. Number 4 would be for young Flohkart. Van Wall number 20 was to be driven by Maurice Trintignant. Roy Salvadori, driving a somewhat modest Morris Minor drophead, had trouble persuading the Italian gateman to let him into the paddock. From left to right, these 3 Ferraris were for Collinz, De Portogo and Castellotti.
Padre costruiva le macchine da Collinz. Sono passati gli anni, anch'io conoscevo il papà. Era mio padre che costruiva le macchine. Ed ecco qui una macchina, una 146, è una Fiat, è una Fiat 1100 nella classe 1500.
We caught Neubauer of Mercedes and BRM's Mays swapping jokes in the paddock. Know the one about the Irish racing driver? Go on, whiz you. He comes into the pits with a dead battery. Yeah. And I said, your battery's flat. He said, oh dear, what shape should it be? Harry Schell got the joke as usual. Manzon's Gordini was warmed up. As the Connaught mechanics relaxed before battle, CC, that prosciutto's really rather good. Rue Prosciutto, that's her name, is it? I always thought that was a sort of smoked ham. Peter Collins arrived with his American fiancée. Jack Fairman, having been entrusted with Connaught number 6 and Les Leston with number 2. Leston had been over 5 seconds slower than Fairman in practice, with Flohkart, the driver now standing in for Archie Scott Brown, another 4 seconds slower than that. The garages at Monza are separated from the pits, just like Gasoline Alley at Indianapolis. Ferrari were taking no chances with Fangio's tires in case it rained again. In profile, Musso's Ferrari shows off the beautiful lines of the Geno-designed D50 Lancia Ferrari. Raced originally by Lancia from the end of 1954, this was Ascari's car in 1955, but following his crash into the harbour at Monaco, and then his death here when testing a sports car at Monza 2 weeks later, Lancia had decided, with financial troubles of their own, to hand the whole team over to Enzo Ferrari. After Moss had won the international trophy at Silverstone, and he'd returned to Maserati, to whom he was contracted, Vanwall had struggled to find further success. But with its glorious teardrop shape, it was well suited to high-speed circuits, and Harry Schell had shocked the Italians by mixing it with them for lap after lap in the French Grand Prix at Reims earlier in the year. Les Leston, Ron Flockhart and Roy Salvadori appeared to be discussing the price of fish before the start. Although many nations were represented in the race, the crowd would, as usual, be cheering for Italian cars and drivers, and in particular, the race between Eugenio Castellotti, seen donning his helmet here, and Luigi Musso to be top Italian in the World Championship. If anything happened to either Fangio or Collins's cars, it would probably spark a riot if either Castellotti or Musso were forced to hand over to the World Championship contenders. It appears De Portago, as the Spaniard, would have to be the fall guy. With 2 minutes to go, there was a crowd around Fangio's car, but no sign of the maestro himself. Then, true to form, he appeared, as usual, at the very last minute. Finally, the race of the season was ready for the off. First time past the stands, it was Castellotti and Musso in close formation. Behind them came Schell in the Vanwall, Fangio, Taruffi, Bera, Moss and Trantignon. Front, until both threw tire treads on the banking and lost time changing wheels. So Moss now led, with Harry Schell in the Vanwall at times brilliantly ahead of Fangio for second place. More tire trouble for Ferrari, as De Portago throws a left-hand rear tread. He had to retire with damaged suspension. So after 10 laps, the order was Fangio, Moss and Schell just hanging on in his Vanwall. The Vanwall was very stable at high speed on the long straights, between the bankings, but its suspension was having difficulty coping with the bumps on that high concrete bank. First Taruffi, then Trantignon retired with damaged suspension, leaving Tony Vanderwaal with just one car, that of Schell. But how Schell was motoring, he took the lead on lap 11, as yet another Ferrari, Collins's this time, threw a tread. Halford had engine trouble with his private Maserati. Then Moss led again, with Collins behind him, a lap down after his tyre stop. And another blow for Ferrari. Fangio had damaged a steering arm and had to sit on the pit wall, waiting for another car whilst his was being repaired. During a short rain shower, Musso pitted his Ferrari, but refused to hand it over to Fangio. At half distance, Moss led Schell by over 12 seconds, with Musso third and Collins fourth. The Connaughts of Flockhart and Fairman were now unobtrusively climbing the leaderboard. At this point, Collins pitted again, and, in an act of unparalleled sportsmanship, handed over his car, and with it the World Championship, to Fangio. This unselfish act indeed also cost Pete second place in the championship, as well as the outside possibility of winning it. Slow motion photography showed the Vanwall in action on the south banking. Fangio, now in Collins's car, number 26, broke the lap record twice and hung on to Collins's third place. With 10 laps to go, Moss still led. He was followed by Castellotti, who had rejoined at the back of the field in Fangio's repaired car. And then high drama. Moss ran out of fuel. Piotti, in his private Maserati, nudged the back of Moss's 250F and pushed him sportingly back to the pits. Meanwhile, Musso took the lead. Moss, refueled and leaving the pits, set a new lap record, was promptly slowed by his mechanics because they had seen that the rear tires on the Maserati were almost bald. Da Silva Ramos's Gordini lay abandoned at the south curve, as it had done for most of the race, sidelined with engine trouble. Musso now had a 25-second lead, and with 5 laps to go, looked certain to win his home Italian Grand Prix. Almost unseen, the Connaughts had continued their steady progress. Fairman was up to 6th, and topped up with fuel for the last few laps. Then yet more drama for Ferrari. Musso, with an apparently invincible lead, had his steering brake, and he arrived at his pit sideways and out of control. The distraught man from Milan was out, and the entire Italian crowd appeared to be crying. Moss, incredibly, was back in the lead, but with threadbare tires, Fangio catching him fast. With Musso out, Flockhart was now up to an incredible 3rd in the Connaught, but needed a few more litres of fuel to complete his final lap. So as he pulled away on his last lap, Moss came in the eventual winner by just 5 seconds from a fast-closing Fangio. Jack Fairman finished 5th, giving Connaught their finest hour with 2 cars in the top 6. Fairman and Easton Gibson discussed their success with Earl Howe. Little did the Connaught boys know then that this would be their penultimate Grand Prix. This was far from their minds. They are currently the most successful British team in Grand Prix racing, but with Vanwell now showing their intentions, and with Moss and Brooks signed up for 1957, things could be different. The young Ron Flockhart, standing in at the last moment for Archie Scott Brown, had certainly acquitted himself well, finishing 3rd from a start position of 23rd out of 24 runners.